In 2013, a film came out about a con man. It was called The Wolf of Wall Street. 3 hours of stolen money, champagne, and yachts. The story of a financial fraudster who lived like a king until it all came crashing down. The film was paid for with stolen money. Not in the story, in real life. Prosecutors say the hundreds of millions of dollars that financed that movie about financial crime had been siphoned out of a state fund. Money that was supposed to help build the future of an entire nation, Malaysia. And the man they say orchestrated it, who allegedly helped drain more than $4.5 billion, who threw the most extravagant parties Hollywood had ever seen, who handed an Oscar statuette to a movie star as a party favor, was never caught. To this day, no government will say exactly where he is. He may be living right now under a different name in a city he was never supposed to reach. His name is Jho Low, and his story is what happens when a fraud puts on the costume of glamour, and the whole world is too dazzled to check the receipts. To understand it, you have to go back to 2009. That year, a new prime minister came to power in Malaysia. His name was Najib, and shortly after taking office, he set up a state investment fund called One Malaysia Development Berhad, 1MDB. The pitch was patriotic. Pool the nation's money, attract foreign investment, and build the things a rising country needs: energy, infrastructure, jobs. Najib chaired its advisory board. As finance minister and prime minister, he held the keys. It was supposed to be an engine for the country. Instead, investigators say it became one of the largest thefts in human history. The man at the center of it held no official position at the fund at all. Jho Low was born in Penang into a wealthy Malaysian family. He studied at Wharton, the elite American business school that has minted financiers for generations. And while he was still in his 20s, he discovered a talent more valuable than any diploma. He knew how to collect powerful friends, the children of Gulf royalty, Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds, the Malaysian political elite. Low became the connector, the young man who could get the prince on the phone, who could make the introduction, who always seemed to be in the room. Investigators say he used that position to engineer the looting of 1MDB from the shadows. Here's how they say it worked. The fund raised enormous sums of money, including through bond sales arranged by one of the most prestigious banks on Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, which collected staggering fees for the work. But much of that money, prosecutors allege, never went anywhere near a power plant or a building site. It was routed instead through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts, a deliberately confusing chain built so that no one looking from the outside could ever follow where it actually went. And where it went was a fantasy. A super yacht, the Equanimity, worth $250 million, a private jet, paintings by Picasso, Basquiat, Monet, Van Gogh, penthouses and mansions in New York, Los Angeles, London, and parties, legendary, impossible parties where a mysterious young Malaysian would buy out entire nightclubs and fly in the biggest names in music and film. Jho Low gave gifts to celebrities, jewelry to a supermodel, and to one Hollywood megastar, fine art, and the actual Academy Award that Marlon Brando won for On the Waterfront. That actor was never accused of any wrongdoing and later surrendered the gifts to investigators. The United States Department of Justice would eventually call it the largest case of kleptocracy, theft by those in power, that it had ever investigated. The wolf, it turned out, was never just in the movie. The wolf had paid for the movie. For a while, the spending was so brazen that it hid in plain sight. Who would steal billions and then sail it around on a yacht? But money that big leaves a trail. And in 2015, reporters at the Wall Street Journal found the end of it. Roughly $681 million, they reported, had appeared in the personal bank accounts of the Prime Minister himself. Najib said it was a gift, a donation from Saudi royalty, most of which he said he returned. Investigators around the world did not accept that explanation. The U.S. Justice Department began moving to seize 1MDB-linked assets across the globe: the yacht, the jet, the art, the real estate. And then the people of Malaysia delivered their own verdict. In 2018, in an election dominated by the scandal, Najib's coalition, which had governed Malaysia for more than 6 decades since independence, was voted out of power. It had never lost before. The fund meant to symbolize the nation's future had instead ended its longest-running government. What followed was a reckoning, slow and partial. Najib was charged, tried, and in 2020 convicted in the first of his cases, guilty of abuse of power, criminal breach of trust, and money laundering over tens of millions of dollars funneled from a former unit of the fund. He began his sentence in 2022, becoming the first former leader in Malaysia's history to go to prison. In 2024, a royal pardons board controversially cut that sentence in half, and in December 2025, he was convicted again in his biggest MDB trial yet, and handed a further 15 years. Through all of it, he has insisted he is innocent. Goldman Sachs, for its part, reached a multi-billion-dollar global settlement, and one of its units pleaded guilty. But the man the whole story revolves around was, by then, already gone. Jho Low vanished around 2016. As the investigations closed in, an Interpol red notice went out for him in 2018. Officially, his whereabouts are unknown. He has long been rumored to be sheltering in China, a claim Beijing denies. In 2025, the journalists who first exposed the scandal claimed he is living in Shanghai under a false identity on a forged passport. And in 2026, according to the Wall Street Journal, he quietly asked the President of the United States for a pardon. Through all of it, for all these years, Jho Low has maintained that he did nothing wrong. The most wanted financial fugitive on the planet, and the governments of the world say they cannot find him. Here is what makes his story different. Ike Batista's fortune was built on belief, in his oil, in himself. Jho Low's fraud was built on something subtler. Access and glamour. He understood a quiet truth about how money and power actually work. That if you stand close enough to royalty, to celebrated bankers, to movie stars, the questions stop. People assume that someone else, somewhere further up the chain, must already have checked. And in that single assumption, repeated across an entire global system of banks and regulators and dazzled onlookers, billions of dollars walked straight out the door, dressed in a tuxedo. Jho Low disappeared into a foreign city to escape, but you don't always have to vanish to get away. Sometimes you can flee in plain sight, step onto a private jet, leave behind a national airline in ruins and over $1 billion in unpaid debt, and simply go on living, openly, in London, throwing parties, daring your country to drag you back. They called him the King of Good Times. That story is next.